Welcome to Toll 101, Introduction to Tolling, Toll Principles and Practices. This program is made possible through funding provided by Aegis Projects, Inc., and with the additional cooperation of Atkins, Valencia College in Orlando, Florida, and Patterson-Bach Communications. Hello, I'm Marty Stone, Chief Operating Officer of Aegis Projects USA, a division of Aegis Group, and I'm joined today by Tom Nucky, National Toll Technology Director from Atkins, a member of the SNC Lavalin Group. Toll 101 was designed to educate a variety of audiences to the unique characteristics and value of tolling as part of the approach to finance, build, and operate viable transportation solutions in North America.
Today, most funding for highway maintenance and expansion comes from state and federal gas taxes. These funds have run low and are expected to continue to diminish, primarily because cars have become more fuel efficient. Though some states have increased their gas taxes, the federal tax on gasoline hasn't changed since 1993. Federal taxes go into a fund dedicated to transportation called the Highway Trust Fund. Since 2008, this fund has gone into the red. It's up to Congress to figure out what to do about the federal trust fund. But states have similar trust funds with the same problems. We believe tolling is a very important part of the overall solution of the surface transportation problems facing virtually every urban area in North America.
Toll 101 is divided into 7 segments that are introductory in nature. They're not designed for experts or to make you an expert. They should be perfect for those interested in a high-level view of the toll industry, how tolling works, the different approaches to toll technology and operations, things that would give someone a good basic understanding of the toll business.
This series will be ideal for engineering and planning students or new hires for toll and transportation agencies, or for the companies that support these types of public agencies. This education would also be beneficial for elected and appointed public officials who are involved in transportation.
So you can watch this series sequentially, or you can watch each section individually, depending upon your interests. Again, thank you to Tom Nucky from Atkins for helping me present Toll 101. And I hope you find this material helpful in better understanding tolling and transportation in North America. Hello, welcome to Section 3 of Toll 101. Today we're going to be talking about ETC customers, the business rules behind electronic toll collection, and how the toll rates are set up for the various toll agencies. You know, when we talk about tolling as a business, I like to look back at a fellow who unfortunately passed away in 2005. His name was Peter Drucker, and he was one of the real geniuses in the business world. He was a business management expert and a great writer. And Peter used to ask 3 questions. And getting the answers to these 3 questions, I think, critical to properly managing a toll agency.
Right.
First of all, what is our business? Who is our customer? And what do our customers consider valuable? Peter was always of the mind that if you could understand the answers to these 3 things, you had the basis to run a successful business. And because tolling is so wrapped up in revenue generation and costs, it truly needs to be operated like a business. So when you look at these 3 questions, it's important then to look at the answers. And first of all, what is our business? Well, in essence, we sell transportation capacity to anyone who's willing to pay for it. And transportation capacity is a finite resource. When you have only so many lanes on your facility, you really have only so much capacity to sell. Secondly, who are the customers? And we call it in our business the willingness to pay. Mm-hmm. And if somebody is willing to pay to use a toll road to either avoid congestion or to take them where they want to go, then they are your customer. And then the 4 things that most research in tolling identifies as why people are willing to pay are time savings, convenience, safety, and reliability. And you don't have to get all four of those. There are many people who use a toll road for just one of those. I know my parents back in South Florida after they retired always took the Florida Turnpike, even though they were close to a couple of other highways, because to them, the Florida Turnpike was a very safe road. And that was very important to them, even though it didn't really save them very much time, and I don't think it was any more convenient. But they were really interested in the transportation safety.
So in designing value for our customers, we want to find products that meet their needs, right, Marty? So as you mentioned from Mr. Drucker's comments, we want to find products that meet our ETC customers' needs specifically, because our ETC customers are the ones that are for us the best customers, highest volumes and lowest cost, and also provide the most convenience with the use of electronic toll collection or ETC. So we have two types of primary customers. We have those that have a registered account, meaning they've provided some information to us, and then an unregistered account, meaning we have to find information on them. So we'll talk a little bit more detail about these different types of accounts. Let's talk about a couple of those. The prepaid account, these can be either transponder or license plate based. It means the customer has made an effort to have a relationship with the agency, and so as far as they've provided a payment method, a license plate number, they've bought a transponder, they've acquired a transponder, some way they have that device and they have a prepaid account that's available for use on the toll road. They've already paid their tolls. The tolls are debited as the transactions happen across the road. The other type is pre-authorized, very similar. You're authorized to use the road. The tolls will be debited from the account as well. And then a postpaid account is quite a bit different, meaning they've established a relationship, a payment relationship, but the payment process doesn't happen until after the transaction. Their credit card is hit from their account after the transaction or postpaid. That can either be a license plate or a transponder account. And those are some of the more common types of accounts. We also have special accounts for fleets. Oftentimes there's trucking entities that want to use the toll facilities. They need an account to help manage their toll use. So we have fleet-based accounts. We have special local accounts for those people that might receive a discount based on a specific area that they live in. They get a discount legislatively to use the road. And then we have anonymous type accounts where customers who don't want to provide all their contact information can create an anonymous account, but still have to make a legitimate linked payment method. And then non-revenue accounts, which are specifically used for like fire, safety, emergency responders typically, sometimes school buses. Those accounts typically don't cost a revenue to those governmental agencies.
Yeah, usually those non-revenue accounts are mandated by law.
Correct.
In many places.
Right. And then we have the unregistered type of account for ETC customers, and these are typically based on license plates. We used to refer to these as violation accounts, but now I think we've seen more of a change that they're just an unregistered. We're not going to treat them as a violator until they make the choice not to pay the toll. And so these are either postpaid accounts, typically postpaid accounts, and they're based on the local laws and the local agency rules. And they include transactions that are bundled. So a customer may go through a toll facility, multiple toll facilities, and then the agency bundles those transactions up into one billing statement and sends out a request for payment. And the invoices are made typically on various frequency periods, but at least once a month. And then these will include oftentimes a convenience charge, since the customer didn't get a transponder, a convenience charge to use the bill by mail type method. And then also a limit, which could include if you don't pay by a certain time, there's a next step or a consequence or a penalty. And that kind of brings us into the violation side. So if a customer hasn't paid, there's an expectation that that bill turns into a violation, and that those are also based heavily on the state laws and local agency rules. And again, those can end up in registration holds or traffic court or other types of judicial processes in some cases, or even just collection entities before they get to those judicial processes. So those vary by the specific agency and state.
So let's take a look at how an agency applies business rules to some of these customers. Typically, a transaction at the roadside begins when the vehicle drives underneath the ETC gantry. And if a successful transponder read occurs and it's a valid account, that really completes the transaction. And this is the one that agencies really like best of all. And in most ETC environments, this is probably about 70 to 75%, maybe as high as 80% in some areas of the kinds of transactions that occur for an agency. But if the transponder isn't read or if the account's not valid, typically what an agency does is takes an image, photographs the license plate of the vehicle, and then that license plate image, that photography, is reviewed to identify the plate number, the state, and the plate type. Now, sometimes these image reviews are not readable, but there's enough information in the photography to make it worthwhile to save that image in a database to potentially match it up to a similar photograph in the future. So sometimes the plate may be covered by a shadow, it may be a weather condition, and then the next time that vehicle drives through, the license plate is visible, and you can match it up using the kinds of video techniques we talked about in our roadside segment. Now, there's a process that agencies go through once they have this image called the waterfall process. And it's how they apply business rules to trying to identify the customer and then complete the transaction. And the reason we use the term waterfall, it's almost like water going over a cliff. Some of that water will go all the way to the bottom. Some of it will be trapped in the sidewalls and the crevices and caves. So it truly is a step-by-step process that transactions go through before agencies can identify who the customer is and then hopefully be able to complete that transaction and generate the revenue. The first step in this process is usually to take that image and look at the in-house databases of license plate images. So as you mentioned, you might have accounts that are video accounts. You might have situations where customers have been previous video customers and you have that image on file. But these are databases of license plate numbers that you already have within your agency. So this is a very low-cost lookup. If you can make a match, especially if it's either a pre-authorized or a prepaid account, you can complete that transaction. And there's a large percentage of these that occur. One thing that happens in the toll business is that sometimes you don't get a successful transponder read for a prepaid transponder customer. This is a pretty common occurrence. And in fact, for a lot of agencies, you might see anywhere from 10 to 20% of their prepaid customers actually getting what we call an iToll, where the license plate is on the account and the agency has read the license plate. They didn't get a transponder read, but they're able to match that license plate image up with the prepaid account and complete the transaction. And sometimes, and most of the time I think, they'll get a notation on that account that this was completed as an image toll. So it's a very normal occurrence. However, if the agency cannot find the license plate number in their internal databases, the next step in the waterfall is generally to go to external sources, to look at some of their interoperable agency partners, to look at third-party payment providers, people who are managing other accounts, either outside of the jurisdiction or very possibly a fleet manager who may have that license plate in in their database, and you present those transactions to those partners. Again, this is a way for agencies to complete the transaction in a low-cost approach because it's computers talking to computers. This is really not a high-cost activity to generate this revenue. And the order of this waterfall approach for these external organizations is usually generated within the agency's business rules. And the reason that there might be a pecking order for doing this is that license plate might actually fall in more than one database. So usually if you've got a relationship with fleet managers, if you've got a relationship with rental car companies, if you have relationships with other toll agencies, you want to have a step-by-step process for looking at that license plate to find out who to send that transaction to complete the transaction. Then many agencies also have a minimum threshold for sending out a bill. So let's say you haven't been able to find that license plate image in any of the databases, your own database or any of your external partners or organizations you have a relationship with. You're now looking to identify who that vehicle owner is so that you can send them a bill or a violation in the mail. But before you do that, a lot of agencies have a threshold. My old agency, for example, had an average toll value of about $1.20, and it would cost anywhere from $3 to $5 to send a bill out in the mail. Even with the administrative fee, it wasn't worth it to the agency to just send a bill to a customer for $1.20 and ask the customer to pay a $2.50 or $3 administrative fee. They just didn't want to do that. So we had a threshold that a customer had to have a certain number of transactions before we would send a bill. And that threshold could be the number of transactions. It could be a dollar amount. But usually agencies don't want to be sending bills out for what we call orphan transactions. Then if an agency is able to identify a customer, they do meet the threshold for whatever their postpaid invoicing rules are, they'll send a bill in the mail, and usually that bill will have a certain amount of time associated with it for the customer to send the payment in. It's a really interesting process applying these business rules. What we've presented here is really just an example. Not all agencies go through this exact process, but all of these waterfalls are very similar to this step-by-step approach. Then the last part, of course, is if they don't pay, then they're probably looking at getting some kind of a violation. And these violations can take a lot of different forms.
And this is where it gets really complex, because each agency operates under different rules, sometimes dictated by their state, through their state statutes, which says what they can do as far as to collect a violation. Some are non-criminal traffic type violations, others result in traffic hearing cases, sometimes registration holds. So this is a whole level of complexity where the agency has to work closely with the attorneys and the processes of understanding their statute and following their statutes in detail. And I think as we talk about this a little bit more, you've got an example for us, but the important point here is to know that each agency is different and they have to operate under their own local business rules and under their statutes.
And a lot depends on how customer-friendly they want to be. But no matter what the rules are for violations, what electronic tolling does is it puts agencies into the receivables business. And back when they were collecting cash, this is not something they had to worry about. You collected the cash at the lane, or you didn't get through the barrier.
Yep.
But electronic toll collection, especially when there's a postpaid component, really puts you into the receivables business. And the purpose of receivables is to try and shrink them. The goal is to reduce those receivables as quickly as possible so that the agency can meet its revenue projections. The process usually begins, again, when somebody drives through a toll plaza, and most agencies have some type of business rule related to time or dollar amount. They don't generally want to send out one of those orphan transactions, so they may have a rule related to how long they'll wait before they send a transaction invoice out, or how much dollar amount a customer has to collect in transactions before they'll send out an invoice. So typically there is some type of a waiting period or grace period that will allow the customer sometimes to call in and pay the transaction in advance of sending out the invoice. The benefit to doing that is that the agency hasn't had to pay for the mailing cost or anything like that. So if they give them a 7-day grace period, that allows the agency to collect multiple transactions over that period, but it also gives the time for the customer to call in and possibly pay that invoice before the agency has spent any additional cost in sending out mail. But let's say an agency collects transactions over that initial period and then sends out that first invoice. And that first invoice is generally made up of brand new transactions. Again, there may be some type of an administrative fee associated with it. And usually that fee is set up to allow the agencies to recover their costs of sending out that postpaid bill. And typically, if a customer pays that invoice, then they'll complete the transaction. And this is really what the whole goal of the agency is. Usually the agency will give them a window of time to pay the invoice. And typically agencies will provide a 30-day process. Whenever I see one of these postpaid processes from a toll agency, it makes me think of a public utility. Very similar to a local water utility or a municipal electric utility, where the customer has already received the water, already received the electricity. It's been metered in some type of a fashion that identifies what they owe, and then they get a bill in the mail. And typically what happens is most customers pay the bill, and the water keeps flowing and the electricity keeps flowing. If a customer doesn't pay the toll bill, what often happens is that the agency will then send another bill out the following month. And in that following month, that bill is going to have the administrative fee, it's going to have the old transactions, it's generally going to accumulate any of the new transactions that the customer has generated, and it may apply some type of a late penalty. And if you think about it, that's what water utilities and electric utilities do. They very rarely cut off your water or cut off your electricity if you miss one payment. That's not a good business practice. But they're very happy to send you that second bill and put in a late fee or some type of small penalty that's not a discouragement for you to pay the bill. And vast majority of people, when they get that second bill, will pay it and not think twice about it. And that's a really good thing, because in the postpaid business, in those first two steps, you want to clear out most of those receivables. However, there are some people who are a little more difficult. They don't pay. Some agencies might have a third step. Some do not. Again, what you're looking at here is just an example set of business rules. This is not for any one specific toll agency. But when you look at this, you say, okay, here's a customer who is not paying their bills. Each time they go through a cycle, they're collecting more transactions. At some point, an agency will have a threshold that will say, okay, At this point, we're going to send you a violation. We're going to convert this from a postpaid process into a violation process. And that violation process, even though it's continuing to collect the transactions, so the bill for the toll bill is going up, also the administrative fees and the penalties are mounting, and very often the violation will come with a much larger penalty associated with it. And unfortunately, there are some people who don't pay at that point, and that's where they go into what you were talking about, some type of civil or criminal, generally it's traffic court, that they'll go to, and unfortunately, these folks can end up paying pretty stiff fines if that occurs. There are some states that treat this as a uniform traffic citation, and people can lose their driving privileges. They can have registration holes placed on their license plate renewals so that they go into their DMVs and when it's time to replace their license plate, they find out that they can't get their tag replaced unless they clear up this toll bill. So there are a number of tools in the toolbox, so to speak, to encourage people to pay their bills. But again, this whole process is about shrinking those receivables down so that the toll agency can get their revenue. And essentially, toll agencies are in the business of providing mobility and collecting revenue. They really don't want to be policemen.
Right, and so it's, as you mentioned, in collecting that money is important because these are user-based financed roadways. The actual users are paying them, they're not typically tax-based roadways. So the construction monies that were spent to build the road, the money spent to operate it and enhance it over time are based on those user fees, and if we can't collect, we can't maintain those debt service coverages, we can't pay for the operations, and we can't pay for the enhancements of the road. So it's critical in getting that revenue back in. And as we talk about revenue, we want to talk about how the toll rates are set and the types of ways we do that. So traditionally, toll rates are different for cash versus ETC. As we've talked in previous segments, there's a difference in cost for cash-based tolls versus ETC. And so the graphic here kind of shows some of the difference in cash-type costs versus ETC-type costs. So if the customer's gone to the effort to create an account, provide a prepaid account, and the agency can get that money quickly to be able to pay the agency's expenses on the debt service, then they're going to pay a lower cost. If the customer's a cash base, or as Marty mentioned, late in paying invoices, there's a cost of recovery for that, and the customer typically pays more. So we also see toll rates that are indexed over time, and they will increase over time. But these toll rates are based all on traffic and revenue reports, T&R reports, that are done to assess how much the toll agency will need to bring in tolls to pay their bond services. And the bonds are really the loans to build the road. And these are based on the policies that are conveyed in the bond covenants and typically expressed as what type of vehicle. Different vehicles pay different rates based on their size typically and the distance traveled. The rate differentials, as I mentioned, typically are between cash and ETC, which is similar to video, same as video and tag. And then we also see the indexing of tolls, and this is really important. The indexing of tolls, this has really happened most recently in the last few years, but as the inflation increase, there'll be typically some kind of increase or an index to the base toll rate. And this can happen on a yearly basis, every 2 or 3 years. It's depending on what that agency develops in their bond covenants. But again, that price differential is added on. And this graphic shows examples of toll rates that might be indexed, and a good indicator of that is they're not in increments of a nickel or a quarter or a dollar. These are increments in pennies, and you can do that with an indexed toll. You can increase that toll rate in increments of pennies because, again, these are electronic tolls, and you're not collecting these by cash at a collection.
You certainly can't do that with cash, can you?
You can't make change with pennies all day, can you? Sometimes a toll rate increase is mandatory based on the bond covenants. If the agency is getting close to not meeting their debt service coverage, which is the amount of money they have to pay back to the bond entities who actually are the physical owners through the bond. They have to be able to increase their tolls. Sometimes tolls increases are set through the process of local boards, but that's very important to make sure that the toll rates cover the bond and the operations and the ability to maintain and enhance the facility. So we also have a different type of toll rates, which are known as variable rates. These are often seen in express lanes. And in express lanes, you'll see typically either managed type lanes or congestion price lanes. You'll get a certain price for the time of day. So there's time of day pricing, which means from like 7 in the morning till 8 in the morning, it's one rate. And then after that, from 8 to 9, it may go to a different rate. But those rates are published, made available to customers, typically on the internet for that agency, on their web page. And then you can see congestion pricing. And congestion pricing is where, as the congestion increases, the price goes up. Just like when you want to buy an airline ticket for Thanksgiving, the price is going to go up because everybody wants to fly. So we use congestion pricing as a tool to manage the amount of traffic in those specific managed lanes, whether they're express lanes or high occupancy toll lanes, et cetera. Congestion, the ability to use the pricing tool helps us manage and keep those lanes open so we can get vehicles traveling nonstop, and we can get a lot more vehicles through a nonstop situation versus a stop and go. So it's important for us to be able to manage the price there. There are also discounts in some lanes for high occupancy tolls. So we would give, say, a car that has 2 or 3 people in it, a discount versus the car that has a single occupancy. And so those are some of the premises behind the toll rates and different types of rate setting.
So when you look at this, some of the images that we have up there, there's Singapore again, the ERP, probably one of the first examples of congestion pricing, as they would vary the price on the time as people drove in and out of their central business district. And around rush hour, it got to be very, very expensive. The chart on the right is SR91. That's one of the first price managed lanes in the US. I think it was developed back in the mid-90s.
Right.
And SR91 still today does time of day pricing. But they do it, I think it's kind of like congestion pricing, but it doesn't use any kind of sophisticated equipment. They do analysis of their traffic, and they determine what the highest utilization time periods are, and they apply a different price to it, and they publish this. They let people know in advance what the price will be. And then the one down at the bottom is MinPass. This was one of, I think, the first in the US to apply a computer algorithm into a real-time congestion pricing formula where the congestion of the existing highway was fed back into a computer, and the price adjustment was based on that congestion. So I think these, and I think that's Sandag, the one on the right-hand side. And I'm actually not familiar whether that's a computer algorithm or a time-of-day pricing, but I know they vary their price
and there's
in
a lot
San Diego.
of complexities to this. So we're also seeing agencies that are basing zone-based pricing. So if you just stay from one exit to the next exit, that might be one zone, or if you go 5 exits down, you might move into a different zone. So everything in one zone would be one price. You move to a second zone, you pay a different price. The complexities also occur for the customers, because in dynamic or congestion pricing, the customer may not know what the price is going to be before they get into the lane. They have to make a split-second decision. Are they willing to pay that to get in the lane? And so there's trade-offs in each of these different pricing mechanisms, both how you convey it to the customer and then how you do your internal receivables with it as well.
In terms of the future of tolling, we're probably going to be seeing much more of this variable type of pricing than the more familiar static pricing.
Yep.
So in this segment, segment 3 of Tolling 101, we've been talking about ETC customers, ETC business rules, and toll rates. I'm Marty.
I'm Tom.
And I hope you've enjoyed this segment, and you'll tune in to one of our other segments of Toll 101. This program is made possible through funding provided by Aegis Projects, Inc., and with the additional cooperation of Atkins, Valencia College in Orlando, Florida, and Patterson-Bach Communications.